Hey there, I hope you're doing well today. We are working from the Whole Bowls Cookbook. This is a cookbook based on meals that you can fit into a bowl. And this one in particular is a roasted garlic. So it's called a forest bowl with wild rice, mushrooms, and roasted garlic coconut gravy. And there are all of those amazing things. As usual, I'm making a few modifications which we can talk through as we go. So we're actually going to start with our gravy. So what I have done already is roasted, and you'll be able to see in here, I've roasted 2 heads of garlic. I did it this morning while I was getting my kids ready for school and doing some before school homework. And so I put 2 cloves of garlic, or 2 heads of garlic, in foil, separate foils for each of them, and put the oven on roast 400 degrees for 40 minutes. And then that just sat there. I went and did my thing, and when it was done, I pulled them out, I vacuumed while they cooled, and then I was ready to go with this moment. So what I'm doing now is adding in some coconut milk to this roasted gravy. This is a full fat coconut milk. Especially when I'm doing vegetarian meals, I don't find a lot of value in trying to go light with these types of things. And this garlic, so once it came out of the oven, it's going to be really soft, very smushy. So it really just squeezes out of the garlic papery skins. And the only thing you're trying to do at that point is be careful not to mix the paper in with the garlic. Sometimes the clove comes apart from the bulb, which is great when it does, and you can just pinch it out. Sometimes I'm just pinching from the vantage point of its connection to the bulb. It's whatever, but you just pull all of that fleshy garlic out of there, and it's going to flavor your gravy. And it's not going to be quite as pungent. Roasted garlic is a very different experience. Also, what we need to do is, in order to create the gravy, have a thickener. So for one batch, it would be a half cup of water. I'm doing a double batch. So I have a full cup of water, and her recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of arrowroot, which is sort of like a thickening agent. I don't have it on hand right now. I have cornstarch on hand, so I'm doing cornstarch. And if you had neither cornstarch nor arrowroot, you could just use regular flour. They look a little different, so cornstarch is going to create sort of a smooth consistency. Flours tend to have more of a gravy-esque, not quite so shiny, but both will get the job done. And so cornstarch kind of acts like slime. When you stick it in the water, it feels kind of thick, but even with just a little bit of moving it around, it easily breaks up. You could use a little whisk. I'm using a little fork. It's whatever. I also have my burner on sort of a medium heat. And what's going to happen is as that cornstarch gets into the cooking mode, it'll start to thicken up. So I'm going to pour this into my gravy. It's really a white substance at the moment. And then you're adding a few things for flavor. So I am not going to add the oil. I don't see a reason. The recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar. So I like to use different measuring spoons for wet and dry ingredients so that I don't have to stop and dry anything. So there's my apple cider vinegar. Then I need salt. And the recipe calls for a lot of salt. I'm going to use less than the recipe calls for. It calls for 1 teaspoon per. I'm going to go with 1 teaspoon total. And if people want more salt in their gravy, they can just add more. Then we're going to add a full teaspoon of thyme. So it would be a half teaspoon. This is a dried thyme. And then nutmeg is a pinch. So 1 pinch and 2 pinches. And you can actually add pepper as well. So I'm just pulling all of those things together. While I'm doing this, I've got a rice. So I have a black rice cooking in the rice cooker. I'm going to add to that craisins later on once it's all done. The recipe actually calls for wild rice, and I just happen to have black rice on hand. So I'm interchanging them because they both have a great consistency. And then over here, I've gotten what's going to be my mushrooms and greens started. I've just got my mushrooms cooking just because I had my pot warming and I didn't want my pot to be burning. So, and kale is not going to take a ton of time to cook. So, back onto keeping my eyes on this gravy. So, as this heats, the gravy thickens relatively quickly. So, when you're working with gravy, you want to be kind of close monitoring. And I'm going to switch over to a whisk just so that I can be continuing to keep everything in motion. And it's not so important right now that you're on top of it because it's still heating up. But once it starts to heat up, it'll start to stick to the bottom of the pan and very quickly mess with you in ways you don't want to be messed with. Another note, so I am doing a steam saute. So I'm using water in my mushrooms instead of oil. You could use either. It's just that if you're going for more of a whole plant-based experience, you're trying to avoid using oil all the time. So it's really up to you. But I'm telling you that because I want to add a little extra water to my mushrooms just to make sure while I'm focused on my gravy that my mushrooms don't burn to the bottom of the pan. But I want my mushrooms to get a little soft. So this comes together so simply. And the great thing about the Whole Bowls cookbooks is that she creates this scenario, right, where I was tearing up little pieces of kale while I'm doing homework with my kids, and I've got some garlic in the oven while I'm doing homework. Then I can do some more stuff. Then I can come back and do another round of things. And then everything can sit and be reheated later if you want. Another really great thing about how she does her recipes is you don't have to do everything and then serve immediately. So many cookbooks, it's like do this and then serve warm immediately, which is a lot of stress because it means you have to be available for the whole process. Prepping, cooking, and then eating right then and there. Life just doesn't always work that way. So I really appreciate her cookbooks. The other addition that I'm going to make to this recipe is I'm going to add, so in this blue pot over here, we're going to have mushrooms, kale, chickpeas, and I'm going to add a little tofu for extra protein, extra bulk in the food, just so that, you know, everybody's getting enough. Her recipe calls for 1 cup of rice, so I've done 3 cups. Because we have little ones who like veggies less, we're continuing to introduce the veggies, but offering them an easier option with the gravy and the rice. So let me make sure that we have got everything. Her directions are, once you've got all these, to bring it to a boil and reduce to a simmer and cook for 1 to 2 minutes. So it's very, very close to a boil. It's starting to get thick. I can feel that. When it gets to that point where you're cooking for 1 to 2 minutes, it's a whisking constantly over medium-low heat. So right now I'm kind of a medium heat while I wait. My rice is cooking. Like I said, once that's done, I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of craisins to it. And then over in this pot, what's going to happen, so this is your mushrooms, greens, and beans portion. And so I've got the mushrooms going. I'll add a little bit of salt. Chickpeas and kale briefly because you're just working for that kale to wilt. And then, of course, I'm going to add the tofu, which isn't going to require a ton of cooking either. In terms of how much kale, her recipe calls for 4 to 5 cups. So I'm going to stuff my 4-cup measuring cup full and then add another handful. That's kind of how I roll. Let's see. So I'll add just a wee bit of salt. That was about a 1/2 teaspoon. So I'll go a full teaspoon over here because we want those greens and beans to have enough flavor. And I'm going to grab my kale as well so that I can kind of do a little bit of multitasking. We can start to let that kale get wilty. So I have a 4-cup Pyrex, which I'm going to stuff full and then dump. And I chose, she calls for a high-sided large skillet. Because of all the stuff that I'm adding, I've chosen the Dutch oven. If I was doing a single batch, I probably wouldn't have gone for that much, but I'm not. I'm doing a double batch, and kale takes up so much space before it cooks down. So, so this was a large bag initially, and this is what's left. And I'll use this for whatever. You could put it in smoothies. You could throw it in a soup later on in the week or on top of a salad. It would go great. So don't worry if you've got a little bit extra. Check on my gravy. This is continuing to get thicker. It's getting a nice sheen. It almost looks like cream of mushroom in the pot. And so that's actually getting very close. I can feel the viscosity. I can feel that thickness as I turn it in the pan. You can feel some of the resistance along the bottom of the pan, which is where you're going to want to be careful later on. Just a quick moment here. I'm just going to turn these so that some of the wetness of the mushroom gets on top of those as well. And then in just a moment, I'll add in the tofu and the beans. This goes very quickly once you get started. This is doing great. So I can go ahead. The great thing about tofu is it's such an easy thing to throw together. So I can very quickly slice it into a diced look, if you will. If I was doing Asian food, sometimes you might go for more of a julienne look. But here, the diced look is fine. But it's so soft, it goes so quickly, and it doesn't require a lot of cooking. So you can very easily just throw it into any dish and let it absorb the flavors of that dish, which I just love. I love that about tofu. It's also a bean in the Dr. Grieger Daily Dozen. So if you're looking to add more beans to your diet, which actually is recommended, and it can be difficult to want to do. A lot of people have a lot of fear that they're going to be kind of gassy, which is a reasonable fear. So adding some of those beans in the form of tempeh and tofu can be kind of nice. Gives your digestive system a bit of a break. This is really nice and thick. It's come up to a boil, so I've turned it down to low. Especially because if I was working with a flame, like a gas-based stove, when you turn that flame down, it automatically goes down. But when you're working with an electric stove, which is what this one is, that burner is going to stay hot. So I immediately pull that heat way, way back. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and allow my tofu to find its way into this pot. The other great thing is I'm not concerned about contamination in a meal like this. It's not like, oh, my tofu is going to contaminate. It's not like when you're working with raw meat and you have to be careful with your cutting boards. And then in goes a couple cans of chickpeas, again, because I'm doing a double batch. I want to make sure not to neglect my gravy because it's at a very critical stage right now. And actually, it looks great. I'm only going to give it like 30 more seconds. But before I take it off, I want to be sure to go ahead and turn. And look at how quickly this, right, that was full of kale. Look how quickly that comes down in the pot. And I'm not going to need to add extra water for the sake of my kale because it's already, there was already enough from the mushrooms that I was using. Tofu also has a little bit of water in it. So beautiful though. You can kind of just see, that's the kind of thing that you're going to put in your bowl and you're going to feel so happy to be eating it. And this is boiling really nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. It's nice and thick. It's not, it even kind of congeals at the tip of the whisk a little bit. It looks just like cream of mushroom, but of course it's not. Actually, with those mushrooms, it'll kind of feel that way. But the coconut gravy gives it kind of this cute, mild flavor. It also makes it dairy-free. So for those of us who need dairy-free in our houses because it's kind to our housemates' bellies, what a great deal. And the instruction here was just to cook until the kale is wilted, which you can see it is. So you're not working really hard, which means that this is also done. I can turn it off. So here we are. Yes, I did some prep work, but I really didn't hang around for that prep work very much. The rice is still going, but it's not going to take a lot of time. So really the meal comes together so quickly, and you don't have to serve it right away. You can take these components and put them together when you're ready, heat them up, again, microwave, whatever you need to do. or you can serve right then and there. That's the beauty of it. So hopefully that is really helpful, and I hope you're inspired and excited to give that a try, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.